Hello and welcome to the Recursion Cafe, where we play games from the discard pile. In today's game of Unmatched, we have Dan on the left and Tahmid on the right making his debut on the channel. Speaking of debuts, we have for the first time Wukong, the Monkey King. He's a solo fighter with 17 health and 2 movement. At the start of his turn, he can take a damage to summon a clone in a space next to him, and he can have a maximum of 3. On the other side, we have one of the big 3, Medusa, who is a ranged fighter with 3 movement and 16 health. At the start of her turn, she can deal a damage to an opposing fighter in her zone, and she has 3 harpies who are melee accompanying her. This should be a pretty interesting matchup. Both fighters are very strong. Wukong typically does better into melee fighters, whereas Medusa has an inbuilt way of dealing with Wukong's 1 health clones. Dan will have to play a really good positional game, using the zones to his advantage to play around Medusa's ability. Meanwhile, Medusa has a lot of discard effects in her deck, and Wukong has, I think, no card draw at all. So it might be pretty rough for Dan, but Wukong is a very strong fighter and can hit very hard, so we'll see how this pans out. So far, Tahmid is maneuvering up and attacking with the harpy. It's a clutching claws into a slide monkey. That does deal 1 damage, which Wukong will take, but then he gets to replace himself with a clone. So all in all, basically accelerating the clone game. That does mean Dan has to discard a card, however, because Clutching Claws' effect. And there is a Golden Chainmail, which is a very powerful card, so I'm curious to see what Dan has in hand. Here is an attack from one of the clones. Already 3 clones are out. It's an Infinite Strikes into a Snipe, so that is a 3 value attack into a 3 defense, so no damage done, and Tahmid gets to draw a card. However, Dan gets to gain an action. So what might this be? If he keeps attacking, he might go down low on card, which could be a problem, but here it is. So here's an attack and no defense, it looks like, and Dan has attack with Re-Jingo Bang, which does no damage to the harpy, and the secondary attack does not trigger, so that harpy is just weathering the storm there, taking 2 of Dan's cards away with no damage, and then Dan will presumably maneuver back just to stay a little bit further out of range. He has left 1 green space there, but Medusa is quite far away. She'd have to boost heavily to get into that zone if she wants to control it. Here is a regroup into a monkey clone. Perfect value, 1 damage through, and Tahmid gets to draw 2 cards. Wukong wishes he had that kind of card draw. So it looks like Tahmid is on a full hand of 7. Dan is currently on 5, I think, and he's trying to take out that harpy. I'm not sure altogether it's worth it, but that being said, it's very hard to approach Medusa right now, given her position on the board, and it's a slide monkey. Unfortunately, all 3 clones are out, so there's no health value there, but it does take out the harpy and put Wukong back to the rear of the formation. So it looks like Dan's on 4 cards, and the harpies will continue to attack. Tahmid doing a very good job of sending the harpies out, sending the minions out to kind of deal some damage and disrupt some things ahead of Medusa, and it's a feint undefended into a monkey clone, so that's 1 down. It's generally rarer to see an offensive feint, but it is just a low value attack, and Medusa can hit way harder with other things, so you may as well use it to clear out a clone, and if they defend it, they defend it. It's not a big deal. So the Monkey King himself will step up and attack the harpy, and it's again another slide monkey, so there comes the clone returned from the dead, and harpy is gone again. Dan is still on 4 cards. I believe Tahmid is still on 6 or 7. So Medusa will keep up the assault. Instead of maneuvering, Tahmid will play Winged Frenzy, move each of her fighters up to 3 spaces, including 3 opponents, and then return a defeated harpy to any space in Medusa's zone. So that just functionally for this returns a harpy. So there was a maneuver and then a scheme there, giving Dan time to breathe. Dan simply draws up to 6 cards. Tahmid is at hand size, so I think he'll have to come to Dan. There's the harpy, and another harpy just to block the way in case something happens, and it's a snipe into a bewilderment. Bewilderment being used on a clone, which is pretty fascinating, but no damage goes through, and that clone can teleport away, whereas snipe just draws a card. That would have been a great card to play to teleport Wukong's clone next to Medusa on the offense, I think. But I'm not sure if there's any movement this time. And there's a discard of a second shot from Tahmid. Dan will play Phoenix Form, action 1. He has 3 clones on the board. He will recover 3 health, which is pretty powerful. And that is specifically a scheme that can be recurred potentially through 72 transformations. So he's back at the 16 health and facing off against a 16 health Medusa at full. There is the 72 transformations, taking back the Phoenix form and taking down this harpy who was not defended. There's a lot of undefended attacks going back and forth, but it's quite odd, but I suppose it's because the minions are more or less expendable on both sides, and they're both saving their big attacks for the main character, which makes a lot of sense. Here's an attack, and it's a Gaze of Stone into a clone, that poor clone taking 10 damage to the face. There it is, before going away, but Gaze of Stone rarely does go through, and so it's just a 2-value attack at this point. It is a 4 boost, so it would have been nice to hold that in hand, but I assume Tahmid had other options to keep. And so here is the clone again, buffering that zone, just defending the zone to make sure Medusa doesn't walk in. It's a Jingo Bang into a Hiss and Slither. So that does mean the Tricked You 4 does come in again, but it does mean that Dan will have to discard a card. It's drawing out a good defense though, and there is a Golden Chainmail discarded, that's both of them gone. And there is another Hiss and Slither, which means Dan will have to discard another card, which is his Phoenix form, which he got back. So he's down on to 1 card in hand. At this point, he will concede a bit of tempo and maneuver to draw again. So Medusa has the opportunity to walk in, although she will be kind of buffered by 2 monkey clones there. It does put Dan in a bit of an awkward position, though, and especially as Sun Wukong is a 2-move fighter, it's going to be more difficult for him to get out of range of Medusa's stare. So here is an attack, and it's a Gaze of Stone into a Tortoise form on Sun Wukong himself. Unfortunately, that means that Tahmid can boost Gaze of Stone, and Medusa tends to have pretty big boost values. So here's a 4 boosted Gaze of Stone for 6, so that 1 damage does peek through, which means the 8 effect damage of Gaze of Stone does go through as well. So that's pretty wild. There is Sun Wukong going down to 6 health from 15, which is wild. Here is an Ox form in retaliation into a Feint, which is less than ideal. However, as I said, Medusa has pretty big boost values, and Ox form allows you to boost. So here is a second shot added in, so Medusa only takes 2 damage in return. Health total is currently 6 to 14, and that was after pretty much just 1 big swing from Medusa. Medusa takes out a clone with her stare, and yeah, this is a pretty hostile environment for Dan to be in. Here's another Gaze of Stone into a 72 transformations. Fortunately, Tahmid is not able to boost that for Dan, so he will simply recur one of the forms back. At this point, a defensive form might be a good idea, so there's the Tortoise form back. That being said, if there's another Gaze of Stone, I think that might be all of them. That might not be the best call. In any case, Dan will maneuver. Is he going to step out of range? Yeah, just out of the zone. And then here's an attack. It's an Infinite Strikes into a Hiss and Slither. So that will gain an action, but it does mean Dan has to discard the last card in his hand, which is Tortoise form. It does look like Medusa's also pretty low on cards in hand, so it's a bit of a brawl in the mud at this point, because Medusa's spent so many cards to boost, and she's down low as well. So a lot of maneuvering. There's the harpy stepping up, and we'll just retreat again, with the Monkey King in his procession on the left side of the map. So again, disappearing into a different zone just to make sure that Medusa can't ping for free. It's a Clutching Claws into a 72 transformations, which means the clone does disappear. But again, Dan gets a card from his discard pile, so at least he's card neutral there. Wait, never mind, he has to discard a card from Clutching Claws. So he gets an Ox form back, but then he discards a Wily Fighting. So there we are. In the end, he does go down 1 card. And he will maneuver. It's going to be pretty tough to get through that much damage on Medusa, but if anyone can do it, Sun Wukong can. There's Fiery Eyes at the Sea, so Dan will get to look at Tahmid's hand and put a card from that hand to the bottom of the deck and draw 1 up. And of course there is a momentary glance, and that immediately goes to the bottom. It's a 4 boost and it's 2 auto damage, so that's pretty bad. And then there is any card and a Harpy card. So now that Dan knows more or less what he's working with, because both players draw a card afterwards, you can make a more informed decision. Here is a Wily Fighting into a regroup, so that Harpy is doubly dead, but Tahmid at least gets a card draw out of it. Both players are probably drawing back up. It does feel like Medusa's deck is teched against Sun Wukong. She has high boost values to overcome Oxform and Tortoise Form, and she has free auto damage at no cost just by being in a zone, so that means the clones are a lot less effective. That said, Dan is doing a fantastic job of zoning Medusa off effectively, making sure it's as hard as possible for her ability to fire. Here is a undefended regroup from Medusa into that clone, so 2 card draw for Tahmid, and there's the clone gone. We are getting later on in the game though, and the decks are starting to run thin, I think. Here is a clone from Sun Wukong, which lets him double attack if he really wants to. Here's the attack, and it's a Oxform into a dash, so that's a big swing. 7 into 3 currently. I imagine Tahmid can boost that to at least a 5 without breaking a sweat. And the dash lets Medusa move around the place, although I think Dan still has an action, so he can get away if needed. There's a feint as a boost, so it's 5 value, 2 damage goes to Medusa, who's still looking exceptionally healthy on 12. And there is just a step away to make sure there is no follow-up attack from Dan. Dan maneuvers, and I imagine he probably just stays there, right? There's no real reason to shift up, but he looks like he just shifts across into a different zone to maximize his coverage. Medusa steps into the zone and out of melee range and will shoot with second shot. So here we have an interesting proposition where Tahmid can boost his attack twice. So here is Mighty Hounds of Zeus for a 6, and then Clutching Claws for 8. So it's an 8 value double boosted second shot into a 5 value Tortoise Form. That's 3 damage through, which is brutal. I feel like it might have been the way the kind of order of the cards that came up, but I feel like discarding the Golden Chainmails as opposed to discarding the Tortoise Forms was less than ideal for Dan. That said, of course Tahmid could choose not to boost against Golden Chainmail, so it makes a little difference either way. Here's the attack, and it's an Oxform from the clone into another dash. Same song, different verse. So Tahmid will again consider boosting. I think he might only have 1 card in hand, which is an interesting proposition. He does boost with a feint, so that's a 5 value defense for 2 damage through. But to be honest, I think he could have taken it, but then again, a feint at this point is probably less useful. We are at 2 health to 10. Dan has done a good job of punching damage through to Medusa, but he's still hemorrhaging health, and he cannot recover with Phoenix Form in quite the same way anymore because he can't create that many clones. Here's a Fiery Eyes at Sea to try and scope out what Tahmid's options are. It does look like Tahmid only has 1 card left in deck, and we all know what that is because it was placed at the bottom earlier. It's a Momentary Glance. So at this point, Dan will discard the Hounds of Mighty Zeus and draw the Momentary Glance. I think it was a bit of an odd situation at this point, and Dan just wanted to see what he had to deal with. But yeah, a bit of an odd decision to play the Fiery Eyes at that point. May have just been better to go on the offense. Here is a boost from Winged Frenzy and a Momentary Glance to seal the deal for that 2 auto damage at the end. So that right there is game. Really well played from both players. It was unfortunate that the Gaze of Stone was able to get through, but Medusa is kind of a bit busted, as I think most people are aware, and so if anyone can get that through over a 5 defense, it is her. Special mention to Tahmid, who's only been playing a few weeks, but he's absolutely smashing it, so keep it up. Thank you everyone for watching. See you next time.